hear from people that they don't want to try making sourdough is because they are intimidated by the feedings and keeping a sourdough starter alive, because it is an active, it is an alive thing that you do have to feed almost daily. But I'm going to talk you through how you can shorten the amount of times you have to feed it if you're not planning on using it. But I wanted to start off by saying a thank you to my friend Sarah Ruth, because when I started my sourdough journey, I was like everyone else back in 2020 who wanted to start sourdough. I was incredibly intimidated by it, but she really simplified it for me. She said, Shanda, so many people make it more complicated than it needs to be. If you think about our grandmothers and our great grandmothers and just the ancestors over the hundreds and hundreds of years who have been doing sourdough, they were not having a kitchen scale. They weren't weighing out the grams. They were simply just feeding their starter and using it to make bread, which completely revolutionized the way that I think about my sourdough starter, because it took the guesswork out of it for me. It made it so that it was more of a usable item in my kitchen and made it so much less intimidating, because let's be honest, it can be intimidating when you see all these beautiful artisan loaves and you're like, I want to make that. And then you hear you have to weigh it and you have to have the right temperature water and you have to have the right flour and all of that. It's really not as complicated as it seems. So I have a sourdough starter here that has been sitting on my counter for a day or two now, and it really needs to get fed. All right, so let's take a look inside this. So this is what a very unhappy, unfed sourdough starter looks like. Those are just bubbles on top. Provided there's no mold or anything like that, we're good to give it a good feeding. There is kind of like a clear liquid on top of it. That's called the hooch. That is totally normal. It looks a little gross, but we're gonna just kind of stir it in and discard a good chunk of this. So I just wanted you to be able to see what the inside of this looks like. So this is just how I keep it. It's a ball mason jar. I have a band on top with a paper towel. That's how it breathes, because you want to be able to have it breathe. I know some people use different methods for this, but I have found this works perfectly. You don't have to have a ton of starter on hand at all times. I only give it a feed when I am going to be using the starter, or if it's just looking really hungry. But other than that, if you aren't planning on using it, this is gonna get fed right now and it's gonna go into my fridge, because I don't plan on using it for a few days. So it's gonna go into the fridge, it's gonna slow down the fermentation process. When I'm ready to use it again, I'll pull it out and I'll give it a feed, and I'll probably give it another feed for a second day, and then I'll be able to use it. So you can put it in the fridge. It can easily go a week without being fed if you're just not looking to do it. One quick pro tip though is, when you get a good starter, put some of it in your freezer. If you just get a Ziploc bag, put maybe like a half a cup into your freezer. If for some reason you accidentally kill your starter, it gets a bunch of mold on top because you forgot to feed it for a week, ask me how I know. You can go into your freezer and you can pull it out, give it a feed, and you all of a sudden have another starter again. So I keep a starter in my freezer on the off chance that I'm going to kill it. It'll last easily 6 months in your freezer if you do it that way. And so you don't have to worry about experimenting with how long can I leave this sitting on my counter, because you have one in your freezer as a backup. So let's give this a feed. So with an established starter, if you don't have one yet, there are many different ways that you can make a starter. I'll link one in the description for you, or you just find someone who already has a starter and just get a little bit from them, and you already have an active one ready to go. I just gave one to my sister-in-law and she was making bread with it the next day because it's already active and ready to go. So if you know someone with starter, you're already days ahead. So what I will do is, when I'm going to feed this, I'm going to stir this in a little bit and I'm going to discard a good portion of it. So I have here a 1/4 cup. I'm only gonna keep a little bit because I don't plan on actively or using it in the next day. So I'm only gonna keep a 1/4 cup of my starter and I'm going to discard the rest of it. So this is where I think it's really overcomplicated. I literally am going to look at my jar and I'm gonna go, oh, it's probably about a 1/4 cup, roughly. So you want to keep about a 1/4 cup of starter, or if you're going to be using more of it, you can keep a 1/3 cup, whatever it is, the ratio, and I have found this that has worked for 4 years now is if I keep equal amounts of starter and equal amounts of flour and equal amounts of filtered water. And the reason we do filtered water is because I have found that it actually works a lot better than just tap water. And I have had tap water. Tap water can have streptococcus in it, which will cause a mold. It's like an orange mold. If you ever see orange on top of your sourdough, you need to pitch it. That's the only time I've ever had to pitch my sourdough, was I let it go for a day or two, and I had been feeding it water from my tap that had not been filtered, which was a big no-no, I learned. And it got the streptococcus like on top of it, which is really gross to look at and think about. So what I'm gonna do is I'm putting, I have about a quarter cup of my starter. I put a quarter cup of flour in there. I really enjoy the organic flour from Costco. I think it's a great flour. It's an unbleached flour. This is what I've been using from the very beginning, and it works really well. And then I'm gonna give it a quarter cup of filtered water as well, and I'm gonna stir that all in. And then I'm just gonna let it ferment. It usually takes about 6 hours for me to get a full fermentation. You'll see it'll get really bubbly, and I'll show you what that looks like after this is fed and in about 6 hours. So all I'm doing now is I'm just stirring it down really good, making sure it's all incorporated, and I'm going to scrape the sides of my jar just to make sure that it doesn't get like the nasty crusties all along the jar, which I naturally get anyways, but it just dries out and it's fine. So I'm just trying to scrape it down as best I can. I'm going to put this back on top of it, put the ring on it, and this is gonna sit on my counter for the next 6 hours, 6, maybe 8 hours, to let it ferment, and it'll get nice and bubbly, and then I'll be able to bake with it. All of the recipes that I use, I start the night before so that it has the 12-hour ferment overnight, and then in the morning will be the final preparation for whatever recipe I'm going to do, so I can bake it sometime in the morning. So I just got back from my book club. It is 10 o'clock at night, so this is gonna be really quick, but I fed the starter around 4 o'clock. It's been 6 hours now, and I wanted to show you what the starter looked like after it had been fed, and it's nice and active and bubbly. All right, there she is. She's happy and bubbly and ready to make a recipe. If this was helpful to you, please like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you have any tips or tricks that you want to share regarding sourdough. And let me know if there are any questions that you have, or if there's anything you want to see from me, so that I can be sure to bring you content that is valuable to you.